Again, today is April 9th, 2020, my older daughter's birthday. Happy birthday. 41 years ago, my wife and I flew to Boston in a snowstorm to give birth to her. Good news this morning also. Her mother, who lives in a nursing home, was running a temperature, and another resident had tested positive for COVID-19. So they were treating her as if she has the virus. This morning, her temperature is normal, thank God. May that continue. A correction to the first video. The 4th International is a Trotskyist vehicle, of course. Now, I'm not a Trotskyist or a communist and have not been political in my life thus far anyway. That may change, we'll see. Events of May '68 cemented my decision to pursue a spiritual as opposed to a political path. The streets of Paris were controlled by students and workers. The whole country was in strike. Conditions were perfect for a revolution, we thought. But then President de Gaulle disappeared for a couple of days, and next thing, tanks are advancing on Paris, the unions are negotiating with the government, and it's over. You control the military and you win. Simple as that. De Gaulle had hopped in his helicopter and gone to speak to his commanders, and the rest is history. We were devastated. I was now convinced that violent revolution was not the way to change the world. The Beatles came out later that year with the second version of Revolution, the B-side of Hey Jude, a rocker as opposed to a slower number, with one important word change. When you talk about destruction, instead of "you can count me out," in became simply "count me out." Have you ever thought about how you make decisions? It's deeply mysterious. It's not driven by rational thought, as we would like to imagine. It happens at a much deeper level. In this case, maybe it was simply that sex and drugs and rock and roll were just more fun than attending endless meetings and getting run over by a horse. Regardless, my friend and I had a parting of the ways. As Yogi Berra helpfully said in his driving instructions to people visiting his house, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Which wasn't as crazy as it sounds, actually, because both roads led to his house. Stretching the metaphor, all roads in life lead to one place: ruin and death. Keeping this in mind is useful for filling the time before the end with activities which bring us joy. And the nature of these may change as time goes on, and we see what brings lasting joy and what leads to endless repetition of unsatisfying loops. But we're not there yet, not even close. The Beatles had already taken up transcendental meditation in late '67 and went to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram in '68. They later fell out with the Maharishi, and people like me were disillusioned by his Rolls Royce and the bling, which is a shame, as the practice is of enormous value. It's a delicious irony that nearly half a century later, my younger daughter introduced me to Vedic meditation, which is essentially the same thing. And I now practice it for 20 minutes twice a day. It's the most important thing I do. If only I'd taken it up back then. And again, I wasn't ready, and I needed to go through my own journey, and besides, my daughter wouldn't be here. I never was a Trotskyist, as I say, nor am I opposed to capitalism as such. It has raised billions of people around the world from starvation and poverty. But in another long arc, I find myself coming around again to a more political viewpoint. In my adult life, I reduced my focus to taking care of the people under my protection. My wife, children, employees, various disadvantaged people, without troubling myself too much with the larger picture. Now, toward the end of my life, I find myself with less to defend, and I feel more inclined to speak out against the madness, so to speak. Winston Churchill famously said something along the lines of, "So you have enemies. Good. It means you have stood up for something sometime in your life." Maybe it's time for me to make some enemies. So before I go on with the next adventure, which is titled It's Time to Go to America, I'm going to offer some thoughts on the present state of these United States. What I like to refer to as the present administration came to power in 2016, and I was surprised and dismayed, along with slightly more than half of the electorate. The antics of the new president and his rolling cast of fellow travellers were comic as well as deeply disturbing. The bright side, as I saw it, was that their racism, dishonesty, cruelty and blatant corruption was at least open and unapologetic. The Orwellian doublespeak was especially comic. But now, 3.5 years later, with thousands of Americans unnecessarily dying and being ruined financially by the denial, confusion and incompetence of the country's leadership, in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, the entertainment value has worn off. The US is not alone here, of course. The only country to have managed a half-decent response is Taiwan. Check it out. I fear this will not be enough to unseat Trump, however. He famously said early in his reign that he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not lose any voters. Now that he has the blood of many of these voters on his hands, I fear it remains true. How can this be? I used to joke that his supporters were not called the base for nothing, but this is not fair and is not true. Many of them are honest, decent people who have been enthralled by his undoubted talent. They say, are you with him or against him? I'm against him. Have you ever watched one of his rallies? The first thing you see that I saw on YouTube when I bought my new smart TV was a Trump rally. Check it out. The man's good at what he does. To understand what's going on, you need to step back and look at the political structure in the US. Nowadays, we have two parties who vie for control of the country, Republicans and Democrats. To understand the tension between the two, simply follow the money. Essentially, it comes down to this. The Republican Party exists to transfer wealth from the middle and working classes to the property-owning classes, and to give as little to the poor and disabled as possible. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, exists to transfer as much wealth as possible from the property-owning classes to the middle and working classes, and to support the weakest among us as much as possible. Looked at through this lens, it's hard to see how, in a democracy, the Republicans could ever come to power. There are, after all, many more middle and working class Americans, not to mention the millions subsisting below the poverty line. To understand this, just follow the playbook of dictators and tyrants throughout history. How do they gain and hold on to power? They do it through skillful management of people's emotions. Hatred, anger, fear, disgust are powerful emotions that rapidly cloud the rational mind. The energy of tribal loyalties is not to be underrated also. Just watch those rally videos. Then watch videos of Hitler's rallies, Castro's rallies. It's breathtaking how these men can persuade millions of people to march together off a cliff. Racism is first, us against those people. Revisit Pink Floyd's album, The Wall. It's just as relevant now as it was back in 1979. Would you like to send our coloured cousins home again? All you have to do is follow the worm. Gun rights, not just white supremacists and bikers, ordinary rural people, ordinary working people, treasure their guns and fear that Democrats will take them away. As an aside, if I were in charge of a gun manufacturer, I'd be covertly supporting Democrats for office. Have you seen the numbers for gun sales when Obama was elected? The NRA is going bankrupt under Trump. The COVID-19 is helping to drive gun sales up again. Religion. How could it be that a lying, fornicating, cruel buffoon has the white evangelical movement eating out of his hand? Google Trump and King Cyrus, C-Y-R-U-S, Cyrus, for some insights here. Google end times. Pence and Pompeo for more. Scary stuff. Throw in abortion and anti-LGBTQ sentiment and you're on the right path. Anti-elitism. In the tradition of Reagan and the Bushes, Trump projects a know-nothing, anti-intellectual, anti-scientific, anti-competence platform which resonates with uneducated whites sick of being looked down on by effete elites. I'm missing many influences, I know. But I want to know Republican voter disenfranchisement through removal of polling places, purging voter rolls, gerrymandering, resistance to early and mail-in voting. Voters in Wisconsin on Tuesday had to decide between risking their lives at the polls and voting to keep a Conservative judge in office or voting him out. Don't get me wrong. I know and work with many Trump supporters, and I get where they're coming from. Nantucket is a major portal for immigrants looking for a better life and finding the opportunity in the expanding economy fueled by the vacation industry. I was among the first wave in the early 70s, coming from England and Ireland. We were followed by Mexicans, Jamaicans, Brazilians, El Salvadorans, Nepalis, Bulgarians, Romanians, Russians, Poles, Lithuanians, Uzbekistanis, and so on. All come to build better lives and build and maintain second homes for the rich and aspiring rich people and serve as a workforce for the hospitality industry. The native Nantucketers are understandably resentful that their island paradise has been ruined by the influx of these rich folks and the immigrants who serve them, pricing their children out of home ownership on the island and taking their jobs. I get it, I really do. Many of the people I work with describe themselves sarcastically as Nantucket rednecks. They keep the place running as they do in the rest of America. They run the trucks, they're electricians, carpenters, plumbers, they understand steel. You want something fixed, that's who you go to. They're also heavily armed and are universally respectful of each other and their rights. An armed society is a polite society. I try to point out that the change has happened. The rich aren't going away and neither are the immigrants, and that the right thing to do is to hire the latter. We're here to work and are full of ambition and creative energy. There are no lazy immigrants. These are the most ambitious and hard-working people from our countries. I also point out that the country needs immigrants. Follow, if you will, this argument. Capitalist economies either expand or contract. They are not designed for stability. Change is the rule. Some 70% of the economic activity in this country is driven by consumer spending. The birth rate among women in America is around 1,700 per thousand. The replacement rate for the population to remain stable is 2,100 per thousand. Each family can only consume so much stuff, no matter how much money they have, and most families don't have a lot. The population is getting older on average. Google dependency ratio for more insights. The only way for the economy to expand is for the population to expand, given all this. And the way the American economy has traditionally expanded is through immigration, you knew. Bringing in working-age immigrants is the only way to grow the economy. This is an oversimplification, but it demonstrates that one of the key policy positions of the present administration is directly the opposite of what the country needs. Same is true across the board. Climate change, rising seas, increasingly destructive storms, droughts, wildfires, floods, all cost the economy and ruin American lives. The present administration denies it's happening. Fossil fuels, incarceration, gutting the civil service, attacking it as a deep state, attacking the EPA, CDC, and countless small programs which benefit many of the Republican supporters. Why would these policies benefit Republican politicians? Perversely, research shows that the worse conditions are, the more people affected are likely to vote Republican, no matter that the politicians they are voting for are responsible for these conditions. Weird, huh? That's it for today. Next up, time to go to America.